It's often said in life that if at first you don't succeed, you fail. Okay, nobody really says that, but in Portal, it can be true. Whether it's trapping yourself at the bottom of a pit, or getting a cube stuck in an unreachable spot, there are quite a few interesting ways to become soft-locked. But there's one method of soft-locking that's so absurd, so unlikely for the average player to discover, and gets you stuck for so long that it technically doesn't even count as a soft lock. Let me explain. After beating Portal's final boss, the game takes control away from the player in order to display an endgame cutscene. We're first shown a section of Aperture's parking lot with GLaDOS' smoldering remains. And Hoopy. The camera then transitions to a corridor full of pipes and pistons before eventually reaching a dark room filled with cores, the companion cube, and of course, the cake. A metal claw descends from the ceiling to put out the candle, and the credits finally roll. What's interesting about this cutscene is that it's not pre-rendered. This area does actually exist in the map out of bounds, and thanks to the portal gun, it's easy to reach it. Before entering GLaDOS' chamber, there's a small room with concrete walls. It's possible to bump a portal through this corner, allowing us to access out-of-bounds space. From here, we can place portals on the exterior surfaces of the map until we reach the cake room. It's pretty far away, so the portal takes a few seconds to land. Now that we're on the ceiling, we can fall halfway into the orange portal and remove it to clip down into the room. Now there's usually no point in coming here other than the novelty of going somewhere you shouldn't be, but for the purpose of soft-locking ourselves, it is possible to tamper with the ending sequence. During the ending cutscene, the credits are scripted to appear when the claw pinches the candle flame. Specifically, the right joint needs to rotate 25 degrees inward. This is the sole condition that needs to be met in order for the credits to play. So if we can prevent this rotation from happening, we can postpone the credits indefinitely. Conveniently, there's a companion cube we can place inside the cake to block the claw. It's almost like it was put here for this exact purpose. Now we can portal back to the main area of the map and defeat GLaDOS as usual. The ending cutscene proceeds normally. Parking lot, pipe corridor, cake room. But this time, the cube is in the position we left it in earlier. With the candle blocked off, the claw cannot fully descend, and the cutscene just awkwardly persists without ever cutting to the credits. And just like that, we've become soft-locked. Except we haven't. Because if we wait here for 27 hours, 46 minutes, and 39 seconds, Chell suddenly has a heart attack and dies. Dying is a problem, because it loads an autosave that places us back in GLaDOS' chamber just before the boss fight starts. Now at this point, we can choose to keep the cycle going. By defeating GLaDOS and going through the ending sequence a second time, we once again become stuck in place for over 27 hours. But because we will always inevitably die and respawn back at the start of the boss fight, we're always given an opportunity to break free from the cycle. With a few portal-related exploits, it's possible to go back out of bounds, revisit the cake room, and to move the cube out of the claw's way. Upon returning to GLaDOS' chamber and defeating the boss, the ending cutscene will play out normally, and the game can finally end. In actuality, we were never truly soft-locked. But this still doesn't address the T-posing elephant in the room. Why does doing nothing for an entire day kill us? If you've ever played a Source Engine game, you may be familiar with the Developer Console. The console allows the player to type in commands that perform a variety of tasks, such as hiding the view model or toggling development features like NoClip. Interestingly, the game itself can issue commands to the console, and this is how the Neurotoxin timer is activated. There's a command called Start Neurotoxins that sets the Neurotoxin timer to some specified amount of time in seconds. When the GLaDOS boss fight begins, a relay executes the command Start Neurotoxins 360, which sets the timer to 6 minutes. The timer only has one job. It counts down until it reaches 0, in which case it begins damaging the player until they die. And when I say the timer only has one job, I mean it. Counting down is the only thing the timer is programmed to do. Once it's been started, there is absolutely no way to stop it. This presents an obvious problem, where defeating the boss with a small amount of time left would still kill the player after the fight already ended. To get around this, the developers scripted it so that defeating GLaDOS executes the command Start Neurotoxins 99999. If I keep the screen visible after the boss fight ends, you can see that it doesn't actually stop. It's just set to an absurdly high number. Now, normally this is fine, since the entire ending sequence, with credits, only takes about 5 minutes and 11 seconds to get through. After that, you're kicked out to the main menu, where the timer can't hurt you. But if the ending cutscene were to somehow become stuck, well, the timer will just keep on ticking. And ticking, and ticking, and ticking, until the entire 99,999 seconds run out, and the player dies. It's a pretty weird situation, but it's not the only thing that's weird about the timer. Do you see it? I've been playing this game for nearly 2 decades and never noticed it until making this video, but once I point it out, just be prepared to never unsee it. The minutes and seconds are counting down, but the milliseconds are counting up. It's easier to see this when the footage is slowed down. Even stranger, the milliseconds value isn't even in sync with the seconds value. Notice how the second decrements, not when the millisecond is 0, but when it's at some arbitrary value. Surprisingly, the reason for this has little to do with the screen itself. See, the screen entity is only responsible for displaying a timer. It doesn't control the timer in any way. The Neurotoxin timer is actually managed inside the player entity. The functional code for the timer exists within the player, and it heavily relies on something called the global timer. The global timer tracks how much time has passed since the current map was loaded. For demonstration purposes, it'll show how much time has passed since the start of the video. Now, when the start neurotoxins command is run, the game takes the current value of the global timer and adds it to whatever value was specified in the command, say 30 seconds. The resulting number is the time in which the neurotoxin should start damaging the player. This is why the timer can't be stopped. The expiration time can't be removed, only moved. Moving the expiration to the past would just kill the player now, so at best, it can only be postponed further in the future. Now, the empty region between the current time and the expiration time is known as the remaining time, and this is the value the neurotoxin screens use to display the countdown clock. Sort of. The screens don't directly access the time remaining value. Instead, the remaining time is stored in the bonus challenge timer. Portal has a bonus maps menu that allows you to play through certain chambers with an extra challenge. These challenges include least portals, least steps, and least time. Playing a chamber with the least time challenge displays a timer in the bottom right of the screen, and this is where the neurotoxin timer is ultimately stored. You can actually confirm this yourself by running the start neurotoxins command during a time challenge, which overrides the timer and makes it count down instead of up. And no, you can't cheat the time challenges by doing this. The actual timer is still tracked internally, despite what the UI in the bottom right shows. Storing the neurotoxin countdown in the challenge timer is a problem because the challenge timer is an integer variable, so it can only store full seconds with no fractional component. When the neurotoxin screen reads this value, it can extract minutes, seconds, but not milliseconds. So how did the developers get around this? Easy, just display the global timer's milliseconds. This explains why the milliseconds count up rather than down, and why the milliseconds aren't synchronized. The global timer is completely independent from the neurotoxin countdown, and can be at any value when the boss fight starts. So to recap, a relay in the map sends a command to the console that starts a countdown within the player entity that gets stored in the bonus challenge timer that gets sent to the neurotoxin screen that has to fill in the milliseconds using the global timer. The term spaghetti code gets thrown around pretty frivolously when it comes to Source Engine games, but this is a case where it's genuinely warranted. In fairness to the developers, there may have been a good reason for this. Based on what's publicly known about Portal's development timeline, the final boss fight wasn't finalized until just a few months before the game's release, and this was back when games needed to be printed on physical discs. It's entirely possible that these countdown screens were rushed at the very end of development in order to reach a deadline. So what about Portal 2 then? With its massive increase in both budget and manpower, surely it has a proper neurotoxin timer. Well, yes it does. The milliseconds count down with the rest of the timer and are perfectly synced to the second. This was accomplished by re-implementing the timer to be completely self-contained within the screen entity, although despite this, there's still some leftover code from Portal 1's design. Notably, the Start Neurotoxins command still exists in Portal 2, but executing it doesn't affect the screens, and seemingly doesn't affect the player either. But if we turn on damage logging, we can see that the player does continuously receive neurotoxin damage despite not dying. What's happening here is caused by the game's health regeneration mechanic. In both Portal games, your health rapidly increases back to its maximum value after 1 second of not taking any damage. The system works by logging the most recent time the player received damage, and continuously restoring health if the current time is more than 1 second later than the logged time. Now, for reasons I'm not entirely sure of, the code responsible for health regen was moved into a different file during Portal 2's development. The new location of the code still detects the usual sources of damage, but it doesn't detect the damage inflicted by the leftover command. Because the neurotoxin damage doesn't log a new timestamp, your health just keeps regenerating as if nothing happened. The developers never had a reason to test if neurotoxin damage still worked under the new system, because the command wasn't intended to be used in Portal 2. In the actual boss fight in the final retail game, the timer running out simply activates a relay to fade the screen and kill the player. Arguably a more straightforward way of handling things. So we know the neurotoxin timer is a little quirky, but so what? It's not like it's the only timer in Portal, because right at the beginning of the game, one of the first things you see in the relaxation vault is a clock. Maybe this clock is capable of telling proper time. Maybe this is Valve's chance for redemption. Let's look at how it works. To start, this timer does not use an actual screen like the neurotoxin displays. Instead, the vault clock is made up of 4 separate animated textures. In order, these values denote minutes, seconds, centiseconds, which are hundredths of a second, and milliseconds, which are thousandths of a second. The texture used for the minute value only has 2 frames, 0 and 1. This means that, without modification, there's no way to display a time that's 2 minutes or higher. The texture for the second value has 60 frames, 1 for every number between 0 and 59. The texture for the centisecond value is actually the exact same as the seconds texture. It has 60 frames spanning the numbers 0 to 59. The texture for the millisecond value is the most interesting. This texture only has 10 frames, but as you can see, most of the frames are kind of fuzzy and don't depict a distinct number. This blurring effect is intentional, so that when the frames are being cycled through in real time, it gives off the illusion that the numbers are changing much more rapidly than they actually are. It's a pretty clever trick, but it only works because the milliseconds are intended to be unreadable gibberish. The other values are actually supposed to tell a coherent time, so let's find out how well they do that. Each section of the clock is controlled by its own timer entity, and each timer is hooked up to another entity that cycles through the animated texture. You can see that there are 2 different entity types for this, but they both accomplish the same thing. The timer for the millisecond value is set to go off every 1/10 of a second, which is why the texture cycles so quickly. The other 3 timers, however, are set to go off every full second. What each of these do with that full second is different though. The minute value is scripted to only change a single time, right about now, and then it never does anything after that. The second value is easily the most straightforward bit. Every second, the texture advances to the next frame. The centisecond value is handled similarly, except every second, the texture is told to cycle through all 60 of its frames. And this is the control flow for the vault clock. Even though it looks pretty chaotic with multiple timers controlling different parts of the same clock, it's all synchronized remarkably well since each timer operates at the same 1 second interval. But there's still some things about this clock that make absolutely no sense. First off, the centiseconds texture only displays values between 0 and 59, when it should display values between 0 and 99. But is that really a problem? Obviously, yes, 100 is literally in the name. But what I really mean is, when it comes to minutes and seconds, we're perfectly fine with counting up to 60. Why don't we do the same for smaller units of time? And while we're at it, why did we settle on the number 60 instead of something else, like 100? Well, the reason is that time is old. Before the invention of mechanical clocks, one of the ways humans measured the passage of time involved tracking the movement of shadows cast by the sun. Uncovered in 2013, this sundial is estimated to have been created in ancient Egypt sometime around 1500 BC, and is currently the oldest sundial that's been physically recovered. The markings on the limestone subdivide the day into 12 segments, and although they aren't exactly equal in length, these 12 segments roughly correspond to the 12 hours we use on modern-day clocks. Add another 12 hours to account for the second half of the day, nighttime, and this is where we get our 24 hours from. Now, the fact that ancient Egyptians subdivided the day into 12 hours seems a bit arbitrary, considering they primarily used a base 10 numeral system. But perhaps it's no different to how we primarily use the decimal system, while still having a notable emphasis on the number 12. After counting beyond 10, numbers begin to have the postfix teen, 13, 14, 15, and so on. But we don't call these numbers first teen and second teen. They have special names, 11 and 12. This naming convention isn't unique to English, by the way. It's present in other Germanic languages as well. It's hard to pinpoint the exact reason why so many cultures preferred counting things in 12s, but a likely factor is that 12 has a lot of factors. In the context of a clock, 12 hours can be evenly divided into halves, thirds, fourths, and sixths, something that can't be done with the number 10. This convenience may be why the day was split into 12 hours, and for a while it was sufficient to measure time solely using hours. But eventually, humans had the desire to subdivide time into smaller units. There were many cultures that contributed to this over the course of thousands of years, but the majority of them did so using mathematical conventions popularized by Babylonian astronomers. Unlike the ancient Egyptians, or even modern societies, ancient Babylonians did not use a base 10 number system, such as the decimal system. Instead, they used the sexagesimal system, a base 60 system where there are 60 numerals, except for the number 0, which was depicted with a blank space. Under this system, it was intuitive to split the hour into 60ths, one for every numeral. Further subdivisions of this newly created unit were also made using 60ths. The popularity of sexagesimal is also difficult to explain with certainty, but just like the number 12, the number 60 can be evenly divided by many other numbers. Considering this was a time before digital calculators, the ability to fractionalize measurements of time into whole numbers was incredibly beneficial. This method of measuring time persisted throughout history, leading to our present day minute and second. But why are they called minutes and seconds? Well, we get the word minute from the Latin phrase for first small part, and we get the word second from the Latin phrase for second small part. We call these seconds because they are literally second to the minute. Continuing this pattern, values in the next subdivision would be thirds, values in the next subdivision would be fourths, and so on. So in a way, this clock actually is valid in a timeline where thirds and fourths became commonly used measurements. But we don't live in that timeline. Thirds never really caught on because there was little practical use for having units that little. In fact, minutes and seconds weren't even measured on physical clocks until relatively recently. This clock, located in Freiburg, Germany, tells the time solely using the hour hand, not for stylistic reasons, but because it was built in a time before the minute and second hand. Minutes and seconds did exist as units back then. It's just that clocks weren't precise enough to reliably measure them. And by the time we did begin reliably measuring time shorter than a second, the decimal system had already become standard and was used to subdivide the second using metric units. There were a few proposals to retrofit decimal notation into the previously existing units of time, but the most serious attempt was made during the French Revolution. In late 1793, the French National Convention wrote into law a new method for how time should be measured. The decree states that each day is to be divided into 10 hours, each hour is to be divided into 100 minutes, and each minute is to be divided into 100 seconds. Clocks that were manufactured for this new specification generally looked like this: 10 large ticks for the hours, with 100 small ticks for the minutes. Comparing decimal time to traditional time reveals just how much of a shift this is. For example, 7:15 a.m. is equivalent to 3:02 in decimal time. 12 o'clock noon would be 5 o'clock decimal time. 5:06 p.m. would be 7:12 decimal time, and so on. This might seem like change for the sake of change, but there is a particular benefit to this system. The decimal time can always be expressed as a fraction or percentage of how much of the day has passed. If the current time is 2:50, you know that the current day is 25% over. This method of notating and communicating time is particularly useful in astronomy, where dates and times are frequently added and subtracted from one another. But given that you're probably not watching this video at 2:80 on April 47th, it should be obvious that decimal time was not adopted by the general public. Just a year and a half after it was initially instated, the French National Convention abolished the mandatory use of decimal time and deliberately did not include it in the metric system. Several reasons were given to justify the abandonment of decimal time. Everything from the fear of confusing the old and new units to the cost of changing clocks. But perhaps the most notable reason is the fact that nearly everyone continued to use traditional timekeeping anyway. Any and all future attempts to decimalize time were unsuccessful. Our system of timekeeping is an amalgamation of multiple numeral systems spawning from several civilizations dating back at least 4,000 years. It's why we separate minutes from seconds using a colon, but seconds are separated from smaller units using a decimal point. And under the decimal system, the centisecond and millisecond values being separated doesn't make any sense. It's like writing the number 6.25 as 6.2.5. The 2 and the 5 are both part of the same fractional component. For the clock to be properly formatted, it would need to look like this. And the centiseconds would need to count down from 99 instead of 59. But in all likelihood, a developer probably figured that having symmetry just made the clock more interesting to look at. And make sure you do actually look at the clock, because if you don't, it might lie to you. Remember these entities that are responsible for animating the textures? Well, there's a bug with the entity type used for the centiseconds and milliseconds, where they can only stop cycling textures if they're on screen. It's really easy to observe this yourself. Right now, these two clocks are perfectly in sync with one another. You can pause the video at any point and see that both clocks display the exact same time every time. Now, if we look away from the clock inside the vault and focus on the clock outside the vault, we can see that it stops once the timer hits 0. This would suggest that the clock inside the vault is also stopped at 0. But it isn't. Due to the bug, the timer only stops after we bring it back into view. A watched pot never boils, but an unwatched clock never stops ticking. In a way, it's kind of funny. Aperture Science is capable of inventing portals that completely defy the laws of physics. They can build sentient robots that harness the complexities and nuances of human intelligence. They're even able to bake a cake that's good enough to die for. But when it comes to building a clock, well, time is just too complicated. Thanks for spending some of your time with me, and thanks for watching.